Steve Thomas, who we're here to talk with tonight, is familiar to television viewers as two-time Emmy Award-winning host of This Old House, Renovation Nation, and Save Our History. He is also an experienced blue water sailor. Beginning in 1977, he sailed a 43-foot wooden sloop from England to San Francisco via the Panama Canal, Galapagos, Marquesas, and Hawaii. In the early 1980s, he journeyed to the remote Micronesian island of Satawal to learn the ancient technique of star path navigation, an experience that resulted in this book, The Last Navigator, as well as a documentary based on it for the PBS series Adventure. Some of you here tonight might remember Steve from his Salem days, when he lived across the street from the Athenaeum or on Broad Street. We are delighted to welcome him back to the neighborhood. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. I packed the house with old friends. So I paid them in rum, which is the traditional form of payment. It's great to be back. It's weird to be back. I mean, 45 years ago, we bought the house across the street, and a lot of faces in this room. We've known a lot of folks here we've known for 45 years and have seen this project through from, consoling Evie on my long absences or going out partying with her or whatever you guys were doing to never that to there's a lot of history here. So we bought that house, renovated it, sold it, bought 14 Broad Street, and also owned a little condo on the Common. And it's, boy, walking around town brings back a lot of memories. Now, all the research for this project I did at the Peabody Museum of Salem back in the day. This was before they expanded tremendously, and they got to know me in there. And Peter Fetchko and his wife Francoise, who's sadly no longer with us, we became friends with them. And Peter said, "Well, you should just have a table here, and why bother checking out books and putting them back?" So I would show up every morning and go to my desk and do the research for this book. So this is a new edition of the book, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it as we wade into it. Of course, most people know me as host of This Old House, and I won't bore you with those details. But my father on the left there was in World War II on a tanker. Refueling PT boats going through the slot in the Salem Island. Ice ship bear, U.S. Coast Guard revenue cutter bear. He met my grandmother on the bear. Here she's pictured with a pet seal, a baby seal. And also on that boat, on that particular voyage, was the Archdeacon Alaska, who took a look at my grandmother and took a look at my grandfather. They were both going to Point Hope, Alaska. Said, "You're getting married before you get off the boat." I know what's going to happen. And so they began next, they were for about 10 years, and then Sitka and elsewhere in the Arctic. My grandmother was no slouch. This is her dog sled. She's out on the sea ice off of Cape Lisburn with the dogs. And this is Cape Lisburn, for those of you who are avid explorers of Alaska. So it was no, surprise that I got the adventure bug from, my family. After college, raced out to Hawaii, sailed about back to Seattle, and went off to the Med instead of going to graduate school. And was first mate of this boat, here pictured in Boston, 103-foot schooner. Then, as you heard, I took a 43-foot sloop from England to San Francisco, down through the Caribbean, down to Panama, down through the Panama Canal, to the Galapagos, and then a long passage down to the Marquesas. This is one of the longest ocean passages in the world, I think, Annie, right? Am I correct in that? It's a big, long passage. So these are the days before satellite navigation, just sextant, chronometer, which was a watch back then, and charts and plotting sheets and a taffrail on. And in the Marquesas, this is Fatu Eva, where Thor Heyerdahl hung out, and this was way before there was anything there. So it was like stepping back in time. Then back up to Hawaii, and across to San Francisco. So I lost the taffrail to the rotator to my taffrail log on this trip, and I started judging the boat speed by eye because I had one more rotator and I didn't want to lose it. And I got pretty good at it. I mean, I surprised myself. And I've been reading about Polynesian navigation. I knew the Polynesians had populated the whole Polynesian Triangle, it's called, all the way out to Rapa Nui, Easter Island, up to Hawaii, and they backfilled into the Micronesian Islands in the middle of there, Caroline Islands. And I knew that there were still 5 islands on which these traditional techniques were practiced. And I decided in my own harebrained way to go study with one of these guys, learn his language, and spend as much time as I needed to, with the indulgence of my wife, of course, to learn traditional navigation. I just thought I could do it. And so I spent a year doing preliminary research. I got research visas, obtained a little bit of funding from the Winter-Gren Foundation for anthropological research, which is pretty unusual because they usually fund, full-on PhDs. And this was a, project that was way out in left field. Got the University of Hawaii to kind of sponsor me academically. UPenn, also one of the scholars there. And so off I went. I wanted to study with this guy, Mau Piailug. He was the most famous of the navigators, and those of you with long memories will recall that he sailed the Hokulea, which was a Polynesian replica voyaging canoe from Hawaii to Tahiti in the early 70s. And there was a documentary film about him that National Geographic did, and a bunch of stuff in National Geographic magazine. And here's what that looks like.
3,000 miles across waters never sailed before. 40 days without sight of land. That his daily estimates of position were never more than 40 miles long. Many nights it was cloudy, without even stars to guide him.
So I had worked for as a consultant for a film called Pathfinders of the Pacific that was done in Cambridge. It was a PBS film. And I was a consultant to the film. And through that, made contact with Piailug. But of course, these were the days before any kind of communication between remote places on the earth. You could write a letter or maybe send a telegram to the government centers, and maybe it would get there, and maybe it wouldn't. But he couldn't read anyway, so he had to go find somebody to read it to him and then respond. So I had no idea when I was getting on the ship, the field ship, to go out to Satawal for the first time, this is 83, that he would even heard about me, would accept me, would take me on as a student. So this was a big leap. I ran into him on Ulithi, and to my surprise, he said, I will teach you. I will take you on as a student. Partly because I guess he'd heard of me, partly because I was a navigator. So they called me the American paliuw. It was, maybe an undeserved compliment, but I took it anyway. And he also knew, and I realized this later, some 45 years later, that he knew that the art that defined who he was, who his father was, his grandfather was, great-grandfather was, this art of navigation was going to die. That the power of Western civilization was such that it would mow over these traditional arts. And this, in fact, is what has happened, not just on Satawal, but everywhere else in the world. And we've all seen it. I'm looking around at a lot of gray hair here, and we've all seen it in our lifetimes. And we know that it's true everywhere in the world. So we got to Satawal, and you see the old and the new here, the traditional sailing canoe, and then the modern, then modern microspirit is this field ship. And he put me in his old house, in his traditional, ancestral village in a Sugalap, and then put me into the care of his brother, Urapa. And I was kind of disappointed because I thought, well, I came here to study with Piailug, but he was going to go back to Saipan on that same ship to see his son. And then he said, I'll come back and we'll resume our studies. But he said, look, Urapa knows everything I know. And so you're fine. And he's my brother. So, you're in the family now. And then Urapa started speaking in perfect English. that shocked me. And so this jump-started my education in traditional navigation by months, because I was struggling and succeeding in learning Satawalese, but the level of sophistication that you need linguistically to apprehend these concepts is quite sophisticated. Even though, as a sailor, I understood them from from the reality at sea. So Urupa and I became really good friends, really stellar human being. He, of course, is dead as well. Piailug's dad. A lot of the people that you'll see in these pictures, and I got to plug the book. The new book is completely revised. Upside down now. I won't pull a Trump on you. Sorry. Completely revised, bunch of pictures, and the Satawalese, with whom I'm still in touch, have gone back through the manuscript and said, well, we don't agree with you on this or this point. I said, okay, fine. I'll pull out, tape number 12. It's in the transcripts. Look at the transcripts. This is what our master Piailug said, or our master Urupa said. Oh, yeah, okay, well, I guess that's right then. I said, but, if you want to put a footnote in to note how you now understand these concepts, that's fine. So it really is the kind of, it's a book that they accept as a piece of their history that they can't access anymore because all these guys are dead. More on that later. The other guy that was really helpful and influential was Thomas Rafferty. This is when he was graduating from high school. Sunday, and this is his wife, Marciana. And I showed these pictures to Rafferty about 10 or 12 years ago, and he said, how did you know she was going to be my wife? He said, I didn't. I just took a picture of the prettiest girl there. And he said, oh, wow. So their daughter is graduating top of her class at Smith on Sunday. Yeah. So how many times in your life you got to do the whole circle? From when he was 16 and she was 16 to now he's pushing 60. He's been in the army, done 3 tours of duty in the army. He lives on the Big Island. And we have just today sent the what they call the InDesign package to the printer for another book, which is called Mau, which is all of the archival material that's in my archives at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, that it's open if you want to go browse through them. It's an excuse to go to Hawaii. And it is the lore of all these gentlemen that you will see in the pictures that I'll show you. So the Last Navigator is my experience on the island. It's deep dive into navigation, but the lore and the kind of deep dive into the spirit world is in Mau. So these are 2 books that express the 2 halves. And like I say, we just sent the package off to the printer today. So again, this is the opportunity to come full circle after all these years and complete this work, for good and for good, is really a tremendous privilege. So Satawal is 1 mile long, 1/2 mile wide. The interior of the island is taro patches and breadfruit trees, coconut trees. A note on climate change here. Satawal is about this far off the sea. And so if you get saltwater intrusion into these taro patches, because fresh water on the island floats in a big lens, you probably all know this, but big lens, it's lighter than salt water. So the porous structure of the island itself, which is coral, is intruded with salt water, and the fresh water floats in a big lens on top of that, like oil on water. So once that gets intruded with salt water, the island becomes uninhabitable, and that's a problem now. So as sea level rises, the tides are higher, storms are fiercer. They're looking in a very real way. And I mean, if you read the New York Times or The Economist or any other intelligent newspaper, you know that this is happening all across the Pacific. They are looking at being kicked off their islands by climate change. So the left side of the island there is the lee side, again, trade winds. So in the winter, you get, pretty fierce trade winds from the northeast. So the habitation is on the leeward side. And even that is not, it's not like an atoll where you get, these big layers of coral reef protection. It's exposed to the weather. So in any westerly wind, the Paliuw, the base of the island, gets closed out by swells. You can see the sailing canoes up on the beach there, all covered in mats. So in those times of year, when you can't get out in a big sailing canoe, you have to fish the beach with cast nets. You fish the reef, which drops off with hand lines. You do some spear fishing. So without the knowledge and the ability to build new canoes, to repair your existing canoes, to handle them, it takes a lot of labor to move these vessels around, to man them at sea, and most importantly, to execute pelagic navigation using stars, waves, and birds, then you can't live on the island. I mean, that's the only way you can live there. And for that reason, the people of the outer islands, and in particular Satawal, are called Rematau, the people of the sea. And they really are the people of the sea. So for a man, the canoe house is the center of the universe. You can see there's a night shot of the canoe house there, a canoe in front of it. It's where you store the canoes to repair them and get them out of the sun, because the sun will dry them out. As every sailor knows, it's where you can get a shave on a Sunday afternoon, or a haircut on a Sunday afternoon, or you can keep your pet booby and feed your booby. It's kind of the bachelor. If you're a bachelor, you live in the canoe house. And predominantly it's a workshop. It's where, the canoes of various sizes, from voyaging down to individual paddling canoes, are built and repaired. It's a multi-generational effort. You can see 3 generations or 4 generations. There's a kid in the very back that work there. And so these skills, navigation, canoe building, house building, and so on, are all passed on in a lifelong apprenticeship. You study with your grandfather, your father, and you learn all of these skills. And even the old guys, they as long as they can handle an adze, they will still work. It's very much part of the identity of being, a member of the island of Satawal and a Rematau. This is he was very old then, he's long since dead, Ikagu, navigator, canoe builder, and of the Chiefly clan. His arthritis was so bad that he couldn't actually handle an adze anymore, but he could still build boats, and he would supervise every cut. And when there was not work taking place in the canoe house, then they make rope and otherwise busy themselves in the work of the island. So the guy's domain is the canoe house. The women own the villages. They literally own the island. The land belongs to the women and not the men. It's a matrilineal, local society. So if you're a chief, you're a chief because of who your mother is and not who your father is. So even though it doesn't look like they have a great job, they have a lot of power, and they are not shy about exercising their power. When the guys make too much tuba, which is alcoholic palm sap, and drink too much, drink too much vodka, whatever, they will put their foot down. So making food, this is taro from the interior of the island. This is one of Piailug's daughters, Hanora, who is now living on the big island of Hawaii. Breadfruit is another staple. I mean, it's hard to take a terrible picture there. I mean, it was really like National Geographic photo land there. And these shots obviously are historic. It doesn't look like this anymore. Traditional dress has kind of been abandoned. They're wearing these kind of t-shirts and cut-off jeans and stuff like that. And it's really, Raffi told me the other day, you don't want to go back. It'll break your heart. It's just changed so much. This is one of Piailug's new grandsons and daughter and niece making these traditional skirts. So the skill level on both the female side and the male side is very high. This is Piailug's wife from the Waito, she's also long gone, making treating hibiscus for the very traditional hibiscus that are used ceremonially. They do practice, it's something like acupressure, and there's some speculation in academic communities that the Chinese were in here. When the Chinese were all over the Pacific, their method of divination, called Kui, is very similar to the I Ching method of divination using the yarrow stick method, for those of you who are familiar with the I Ching. So, and the acupressure may well come from, Chinese sources. So, I don't know how much work has been done on this. Certainly none in the United States, some in Japan, and there may have been some done in China, which is kind of beyond the paywall as far as American scholars go. So given that it's a matrilineal, matrilocal society, some women live in the same house their whole lives because their husbands come to live with them, and they have to take care of their wife's pogos or village and their mother's pogos or village as well. Bathing in the lagoon in the evening. One of Piailug's daughters. So they, all with great good grace, and they got used to me taking pictures, and it didn't really bother them at all. The kids would chase me around and say, camera sees me, and they'd want their pictures taken. So I ended up with some great pictures of the kids too. Another one of Piailug's daughters, Christina. I don't know where she's living now. Ceremonial dancing. The young women, they cover themselves with this turmeric. It's called ran, and it is the color of light. So light comes into the stomach, which is the seat of knowledge, and informs the seat of knowledge. The seat of knowledge is not the head, it's the stomach. And then the older women say, well, the younger girls are pretty and all that, but we really know how to dance. And then they turn it up 4 or 5 notches. So for young men, boys, learning navigation is paramount. The only way that you can achieve a high status, other than being a chief, which is hereditary, is to become a navigator. So it starts with a lesson called Metakeki, unfolding the mat. It all happens on this mat. Here's what that looks like.
The very next day, he began teaching me the names and positions of the guiding stars. He taught me as he teaches his own sons, as his grandfather first taught him. Piailug uses the coral to represent the 15 principal stars. As they rise in the east, set in the west, they mark out 32 points on the horizon.
So here's what that looks like in a diagrammatic view. So there are 32 points around the horizon, defined by the rising and setting points of 17 stars or constellations. Polaris marks out north. It's 7 degrees north latitude, so Polaris is 7 degrees above the northern horizon. Southern Cross, upright, marks south. Rising Altair marks out east. Setting Altair marks out west, and so on, all the way around the 32 points. So the stars give you both the definition of direction and also a way to sail to your objective. The blue lines there are swells. They identify 8 swells from each octant of the compass. And I'll show you what steering by the swells looks like in a sec. So if you know, for example, that an island lies to the east, you can theoretically follow the rising Altair, or one of the stars that rise that follow the same path. They're called star paths. And theoretically, you reach the island. Of course, that does not account for steering error, leeway, current drift, and all the other factors that will take you off course. But that gives you the base of the system. This gives rise to what is the navigator's chart case, which is called Wolfanu, which is and this is, again, none of this is written down. It's all memorized. It's the direction from Satawal to all the outlying islands in that voyaging circle and then back. So for example, from Satawal to Truk is rising Miailug, Altair, and from Truk back to Satawal is setting Altair. So this is recited in a long chant. I sit on Satawal, I go rising Altair on Truk. I sit on Truk, I go setting Altair on Satawal, and so on. So Piailug had me record the Wolfemu for all of the islands in the Carolines, and which is already a lot of stuff to memorize. And you have to remember this when, at sea, when you're kind of not feeling great, or you're hungry, or thirsty, or you're lost, or whatever, you have to keep all this. It all happens in the mind. And then he went on and gave me sailing directions and courses from Hawaii to Tahiti and on to South America. I said, where did you get that? And he said, well, I got it from my grandfather. So unknown. And he said, I followed this course from my grandfather when I sailed to Hokulea from Hawaii to Tahiti. So unknown how far they actually went. There's some speculation that the Micronesians and Polynesians touched South America, but there's no evidence that I know of that they did that. So you got the star course, who knows? So here's what sailing by the swells looks like. You keep the angle of the canoe consistent with the swell, and you check the direction of the swell in the morning and the evening against the stars. Now, it looks fairly straightforward when you have a big identifiable swell like this one, and the weather's clear, and you can see the swell during the day. But imagine doing it, when the weather's really rotten, the seas are all confused, it's dark, it's overcast, and so on. So the definition of courage, Piailug told me, is keeping your mind clear enough to remember the words of my grandfather and father at sea in conditions like this. Without the words of my father and grandfather, I would be lost. And courage is defined as keeping your head clear to remember this. How do you organize all this? I mean, we have in the old days, now we got, a big video game. We just, drive a video game called GPS. But, in the old days, and I see some people I know sailing who remember plotting sheets and remember sextants and remember how to do all that stuff. So you need a way to organize this information and be able to plot your course either on paper or mentally. And they use a system called attack, which means stage. And basically, without doing it too deep a dive, it takes a reference island off to the side. It might be a real island, it might be an imaginary island. And the stars, the picket of stars on that circle that you saw earlier, radiate through the reference island and cut the course into attack or stages. And you mentally picture yourself, you picture the canoe being still and the sea moving around you. And that's how you keep this mental plot going. So imagine trying to do that when you're cold, tired, hungry, lost. And it's a lot. So there are attack configurations for all the different islands. And every voyage has a different configuration. This is a commonly made one from Satawal down the lower right up to Paliuw or West Paliuw in the top of the page. This is one to Lamatrek with sailing directions superimposed on top of it. Then I said, well, and this obviously happened over a long period of time. I said, what happens if you get lost? And he got really quiet. And he said, he took my notebook, and he said, Satawal is here. And then here, under Rising Altair, is a frigate bird that flies in circles. And here, under Rising Little Dipper, is a swordfish that appears at the top of the water. And this is called pukuf. Pukuf means to tie. And he took a palm frond and he tied a series of knots in a palm frond and then made a circle out of the palm frond. So it ties a series of knots, which are these sea creatures, around each island. And they were all placed in the sea by Anamuerasi, the spirit of navigation, to help the navigator when lost. And in the book, if you have a chance to read it, I go in a long discussion with Urupa about are they really there? Yes, they're there. Well, if you go and find this frigate bird, and will you see it? No. If you're not lost, you won't see it. Well, how about if you're lost? Well, yeah, then you'll see it. Okay, well, what if you? This is a turtle. This is on the way to. It's on this thing, but there's a turtle that is on the way to Puluwat. So what if you come across the turtle and you're kind of lost? Oh yeah, you'll see the turtle. So what if you take a buoy and you drop it down, and then you go back and find the buoy where you'll see the turtle? I hate logic. He said, well, I guess you would have to see it. That's true. But he said, look, these creatures were placed in the ocean by Anamorata to help us when we're lost. We only see them when we're lost. We don't have big canoes made of steel like you guys do, or sextants or chronometers or any of that stuff. All we have is our little wooden canoes. We only see these when they're lost. So this is the point at which, what's straightforward navigation, although unconventional to a Westerner, spills into the metaphysical. And there are many, many points in Micronesian navigation at which it spills into the metaphysical. And that's where it really gets interesting. So, and I was taught all this stuff. And all these scholars had said, you'll never learn this. Nobody will ever teach you Pukuf, ever. And, like week 2, I'm learning Pukuf. And there was this urgency on the part of all of them, Urba and some of the older guys included, that if they didn't teach it to this Western paliuw, who had cameras and tape recorders and typewriters and stuff to write it all down, it would be lost. So Urba, like his brother, is a master canoe builder. Their canoe, Suntory, which is our canoe, named after the traditional sea god of vodka. They love to drink. It was the fastest canoe on the island. So Urba said, can you make a sail? I said, yeah. I brought 9 rolls of sailcloth. I said, okay, we need a new sail, so make a sail. I said, okay, fine. So I get out this hand crank sewing machine. I start making a sail. I'd worked in a sail off in England at one point in my checkered career. And, Urba comes by and says, yeah, we don't make sails that way. Well, we make them. And then another old guy comes by and says, yeah, we don't do it like that. A third guy, and a fourth guy, and a fifth guy. So I started to get a little worried. And then finally, Urba came back and said, all the old guys say we've never made a sail like that ever on Satawal. Ever. Not in the whole history of Satawal have we made a sail like this. So, I had never sailed on a Micronesian sailing canoe. So, this took some major cojones to claim that my sail would be a good sail. But, I'd studied the footage from the film that I worked on. And, I knew that the sails had to be flatter. So I cut this one really flat. So we take off. Canoe's done. There's fish running on the offshore reef, skipjack tuna. We launch the boat with a new sail. Everybody's waiting to see how it performs. Trades are quiet early in the morning. They pick up, and then they start howling. And I look at the clew, the back corner of the sail, and it's ripping out. And I said, Urba, we got to drop the sail. I got to fix the back corner there, the clew. He said, now we got to catch the other canoes. So I'm looking and looking, it's just tearing out. And finally it tears all together. And Urba's like, I told you. So I fixed it. We hoisted the sail again. Off we go. We catch up with the other canoes, go right through the fleet because it's a fast boat and it's a fast sail. But of course it's downwind. So and we fished the reef for the day. We did this for the next 3 weeks, by the way. By about 1 o'clock, all the captains decided it was time to go back. And the wind had lightened by then, the swells had knocked down, and this was the true test of the sail, because it was upwind, back to Satawal, and now I really, and everybody else waited to see, is this guy, does he know what he's doing, or is he or is he full of it? And so Urba took the sheet to squeeze as much speed and pointing ability out of the canoe as possible. And to my relief, we drove through the fleet. We pulled about 1.5 miles into the lead, and by the time we reached Satawal, you can see the next canoe. It's way behind us. So I was a hero. Now, I don't know if I deserved it, to be honest with you. because any new sail would have been fast, and the boat was really fast. But you know, it did give me some street cred. So then the weather closed in. Orderpa got hauled back to Yap, where he had worked intermittently as an orderly in the Yap hospital. And I was kind of lost, you know. I fluttered around working on my Satawalese, which was getting better, but I wasn't fluent by then. And then I ran into this guy named Piailug, who was, Piailug introduced him as our father. And he said, come and, you know, give Piailug cigarettes and medicine and anything he needs, because he's my father and therefore he's your father as well. So this is where I came across him, bathing in the shallow inner lagoon. And he said, what are you studying? I said, well, I'm studying, named all the stuff I was studying. And he said, what else do you want to learn? I said, I want to learn Etong. Etong is the secret language of conflict resolution. It's never been taught to another Westerner. And again, all the scholars said, you'll never learn it. Nobody will ever teach you. There's not a chance in hell. And he said, why do you want to learn Etong? I said, because it's beautiful and because it is of great interest to navigators. And I think Americans need to learn about it. And he said, okay, I'll teach you Etong. Just like that, right? And I come to my hut tonight. So the women also carry the lore as well as the men. So if a guy dies, she can teach her son or daughter the lore, all of it, even navigational lore. And this is his wife, Anna Pugelmeyer. So with Raffabi, who was also a son of Urpa, we went to his hut. He recorded all the Etong, and then we began the long process with Piailug. It took a couple, 3 weeks to decode the Etong. And we were the last students that he had, because he died in between my first trip and second trip. And to this day, Raffabi says, you know, I wish I had been able to get back to Satawal and talk to Piailug, our father, because I knew there was something else he wanted to teach me. So what's interesting, and I could only have this experience having now revised The Last Navigator, you know, with Raffabi and his brothers, Adamai and Matuela and so on, I mean, we've taken sort of parallel journeys, the young guys on Satawal and me, and over these many decades now, and come back together to understand what an incredible experience we all had, you know, when we were young. He was 16, I was 30, but still, it was 45 years ago. So we talked. One of the great Repi, one of the great wise elders of Satawal Island. So Piailug never came back to Satawal that trip, and he sent word, said, come and meet me on Saipan, where he was teaching his relatives navigation. So I met him on Saipan, and we continued with studies on land, you know, all of the Warfanu, Pukulf, and so on, all the book learning. And he was in particular keen to teach me weather forecasting using the shape and the color of the clouds at sunrise and sunset. So I was on Saipan for about a month or so, I guess, maybe a little bit longer, and finished up the book learning. And he said, well, you're done with the book learning. You've written it all down, and we can only continue our studies when you come back to Satawal, and we'll continue your studies at sea. So I went back the next year, and immediately we took off and went to this island, Piailug, which is an idyllic South Pacific island, blue water. This is a great shot. This is cover of the book. And I took it in the water with an underwater camera and had the boat sail over me. It's got a big fringing reef, so the anchorage is quiet. It's uninhabited because there's no fresh water. And on the way, about the last hour or so, Piailug said, do you want to steer? I said, sure, let's steer. You know, I've never steered a Micronesian sailing canoe. And all the guys were like, is this guy going to wreck our canoe or what? But, you know, a boat's a boat. And, you know, if you grew up, you know, sailing dinghies and then bigger boats, and it's just another boat. So you figure out how to sail it. And it didn't take too long before I got in a groove and picked up speed, and, you know, everybody relaxed. Piailug had me sail it through the reef channel and right up to the beach, and then with great flair, I let the boat turn sideways to the wind, the sail stream, and there we were. You can anchor your boats right alongside shore there because there's almost no tide and there's no swell action. A lot of fishing there. That's the whole business of West Paliuw. That's a wrecked Japanese fishing boat you see there on the reef. And you either drive them into a net and then string them up to dry, or you spearfish them. And the boys, the younger boys in particular, love West Paliuw for two reasons. One, they get enough to eat because you're fishing all day, and they're free of the stern gaze of their aunties and mothers and grandmothers. This is a little barbecue on the way back home. You don't want to tangle with. Would not like to be a teenage boy in trouble with her at all. So the other thing that Piailug was focused on that trip was building a new canoe. We talked about this canoe as a possible vessel to sail from Satawal to Saipan for a film that I wanted to do and he wanted to do, and I thought we could, probably sell to somebody or get somebody to produce it. So, he said, you can run a chainsaw, right? Yep. So, okay, get the chainsaw, tune it up. We're going to go cut down a breadfruit tree. I mean, people ask me, you seem to have been accepted, fairly quickly. How come? I said, because I could do stuff. I was useful. And I brought a bunch of Satawal, and I was always happy to go buy a bottle of vodka and a couple of cartons of cigarettes that, that they have a little general store there. So we cut down the tree, split it into two big planks, and then started working it before it went back to the canoe house. Order boat was back by this time. This is the second year, so you can see him second from the right there. And, they trusted me enough with an adze to turn me loose. So, they kind of ignored me and let me just work alongside her, which was really cool. And it was a great compliment. So that older guy that I showed you before with the big Seiko watch, they love those watches. Whenever work is taking place on a canoe, whether it's new or being rebuilt, there is a master canoe builder watching because it's all by eye. Everything is by eye. There are some proportions that have to be honored that control the general shape of the hull, the height of the mast, relation to the hull, and so on. Everything else is by eye. And they have an expression which many a frustrated American yacht designer, Western yacht designer is very familiar with. Only the sea knows if a canoe will be fast. And that is very true. So we focused, when we're not fishing or on the boats, we were working on this canoe. That is that canoe actually en route to Saipan. We did go back and shoot a film for public television's adventure series in '87 and '88. Next and final voyage in the on-water learning experience was to Piailug. Piailug is dead upwind, 60 miles. Generally, it's not a super challenging trip, but this time we were right at the edge of the season when the westerlies started to set in. The weather started out okay and then deteriorated. And, this was a night of lightning, thunder, absolutely zero visibility, radically shifting winds that threatened to knock the sail over it's only supported from windward, not supported from leeward. So we finally dropped sail and just drifted for the night. In the morning, we didn't know where we were. And this is the, fear of this type of navigation. Once you kind of lose your plot, your mental plot, it's tough because you just don't know where to start. I mean, we've got a sextant and, we can start shooting sunlines. So I did have my sextant with me, plastic sextant that I kept with my life raft on the boat that I sailed from England to San Francisco. So do you want me to, pull out my sextant and see if I can figure out some sunlines? I said, yeah. So I did that. And meanwhile, they had identified some striations in the reef we were sailing over. Unfortunately, my sunlines came in right on top of that reef. And then we knew where we were, so we made it to Peak. This is, again, a little tiny island. There's no fresh water on the island and no fringing reef. So it's a place that turtles like, and it's a turtle hunting island. Turtles are a big part of the protein mix, and they are highly protected by taboos, have been for generations. One of the big fears that Piailug had and the other elders had was that the younger guys were not following the taboos, so they were overfishing the turtles, which is a disaster. It's pretty rough and ready. You chase a turtle down, you lasso it, and you tie the poor thing to a log, drag it ashore, and then it gets shipped to Satawal to be consumed. But again, as I say, a huge part of the protein mix. As tough as the trip up was, the ride back was a cakewalk, and that was the last of the big voyages that I took with Piailug until I returned again to sail to Saipan. So this was kind of the end of this was the time when, if I had been Satawalese, I should voyage out on my own. Traditionally, when you learn enough to captain your own boat, you do. And then you come back every week, every month, every year to keep studying with your master until at the end of his life, his spirit goes into you and you become him. But, I'm a white guy from Boston, so that's not going to happen. And, so I was kind of, Piailug was understandably disappointed, but he knew what the deal was too. At least I was writing it all down and was going to put it in a book. So by this time, the older guy, I spoke Satawalese pretty well. The older guys all understood that they were going to, as soon as they died, and they were dying, their knowledge was going to go, because typically the younger guys come back and they learn, but it wasn't happening. They were going off to college, then they were going to Guam, Honolulu to get jobs and get cars and get in debt and live the great American dream, and they weren't coming back to learn from the elders. So Salem is a master of medicine and a great storyteller. He's telling a story about one of the traditional stories. So he said, he comes to my hut early one morning and says, give me some cigarettes and some coffee. So, okay. So come on, I'm going to teach you how to gather the medicinal recipe for the Enos medicine. I said, okay, fine. So off I go. The stuff is so secret. And he's going through the woods. You need one of these, you need one of these, you need one of these, he's putting them in his little bag. And then he mixes up the medicine, and all the pregnant women drink the medicine. They suck it out of these medicine balls to keep the sea spirits from coming in through their breasts and eating the yet unborn child. And this was actually Raffi's sister, who is pictured here. And then there was a story. So I studied with Salem for quite a while and wrote all his stuff down. And then there was a story about an origin story that nobody could remember. And they said, well, you should talk to this guy, Aoion. He's blind. He's in this hut over there. So I went over there and said, hey, I'm Steve Thomas. I'm, oh yeah, the American paliuw. I said, do you know the story? I said, of course I do. I said, what do you mean? He said, don't you see that my hair is white and my beard hairs grow down long? I know that story. I know all the stories. I know all the stories. I said, well, would you tell me the story? I said, sure. So he records that story. And I said, well, what else do you know? He said, I know everything. I said, would you teach me? He said, yeah, because I've waited and waited. I have a pain in my head. I've waited so long for somebody to come and ask me these things, and nobody's come. What can I do? Take it up into the sky with me when I die. So for the next month or month and a half, it was really a long time. Fiti, who was the guy in the water, and I went and studied with Aoion, and I recorded all of his stuff. And this is in large part Salem Aoion, and some of the other guys that you'll see a picture of in a minute are the substance of this new book, UAM Now. So this was like a deep dive into the old world of Micronesia. Obviously, he's long since gone. Fiti he's now a chief. But at one point, Aoion called me my son, the chief. And as we were walking back to our village, Fiti said, you were just given the highest compliment that anybody could give you. To be my son means he's your father, but to be the chief means that he regards you as a chief. So I didn't even know, well, I had a sense, but I didn't know in their terms what a huge privilege I was being accorded. And this was true across the board. You know, this last season on the island, everybody came forward and said, you got to record my knowledge. Remenar, who was from Punnap, was a master at Eton. Lugato, one of the chiefs, wanted me to record a bunch of stuff that he knew. Otalig, one of the great chiefs of Satawal Island, navigator, canoe builder, and Repi, wise elder, had me record all of this stuff. And this is all, you know, in this book that's now headed back. So the school year was starting. I knew that, you know, I had to take that boat back. I'd been on the island another 3 or 4 months by this time. This is Mau Piailug, who's the Western trained dental technician. And so, you know, this began the party cycle, getting ready for me to leave. And, you know, my dancing got really good, fueled by tuba. Piailug and I were great pals. And then I individually went to everybody and said, you know, to thank them. Urapa, who's now gone, Namaito, Piailug's wife, Aoiang, Powdermai, who's the master of tattoo, Ramai, who's on the right there, Chief Ramai, and Ikagun, the boat builder, master navigator. This is Rapungal, one of the other, you know, very highly regarded navigators on the island. A young navigator, Aragamai, who studied with Piailug and did what I described before, studied with Piailug, went out on his own, and would come back. And he was then, you know, a young navigator. And last I heard, he was still a navigator. Georgiana, one of Piailug's daughters. You know, these are experiences that now live as indelibly in my mind and in pictures as when I was there experiencing them. And the shots can't be taken anymore. This world just doesn't exist. And Piailug himself, master of the ways of land and sea, a man I came to love, a man who gave me more than I knew at the time and have come to realize over the past 45 years, and in particular, working on the new version of the Last Navigator, and of course, Uena Manau. Microspirit showed up. All the kids went back to high school. I was on that boat with them. And Piailug, that was the last time I saw him. He died in 2010. And so in a very real way, he was the Last Navigator. Thank you all very much. Question? Don't be shy.
Are you going to the graduation?
I am. Oh, yeah. You bet. Yeah. I mean, I'm Uncle Steve and Evie's Auntie Evie. I mean, you know, this is like, you know, she went to Smith on a full boat scholarship. Yeah, it's wow. I know, it really is. And you know, Raffi and I, it's become, I mean, we were close, but we've become, you know, like brothers. We call each other brother. I mean, we are technically brothers, but still, it's a great gift. A shy group tonight. Come on, how about some of the planted, the audience that's planted back there?
So how come there was no turtle or bird that time when you had to pull out your
When you got
plastic?
lost.
That's it.
Well, that's interesting actually, because there was well, we did, so the striations of the reef are also part of Puguf. So in many cases, it's a bird or a, you know, sea creature, but sometimes it's a feature of the reef. And there, you know, there aren't any reefs. There are not that many reefs except, you know, around Satawal, except on Peak. So that Puguf shows up in Puguf Peak and Puguf West Flyer. But when Piailug was off the island and Urapa was off the island, they said, the younger guys said, hey, we want to go try to find this offshore reef to the northeast that's marked on the charts, and it's there. It's a deep sea reef, and skipjack tuna typically run on it. They said, do you think you can find it? I said, you know, can try. It's mismarked on the charts. So we got out there and I shot a whole bunch of sun lines, and the plots came in really, accurately, as I advanced the sun line, but we couldn't find the reef. But we did see this, the tagalar, this swordfish. And I told Piailug about it on Saipan, and he said, "Oh, that," and then he, said, "Okay, where were you? And how many? What was your distance off of Satawal? What was the course? And so on." I had a chart with me, so I was able to show him. He said, "Oh, that was tagalar. You saw that because tagalar was showing itself to you because you lost."
So Steve, if Satawal's a mile long and half a mile wide, and it's a matrilineal society, how do they prevent inbreeding? And if you marry someone from a different island, does the husband go to that island?
Great question. Did everybody hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is one of the big problems, because inbreeding, well, your cousin is your sister or your brother. So it's tough to find a marriageable partner. So, and since the guys have to go off island to find a marriageable partner, they have to split their time between, Lamatrack, for example, in Satawal, or Wooley in Satawal, or whatever island they find a marriageable partner on. And that makes it really difficult to, study navigation. That's one of the elements that has prevented or impeded the transmission of navigation. Good question. Yes, sir.
You have pardon my ignorance, but I have some recollection of something they call like this ancient map that's like some sticks that are woven with some reeds or something.
Right.
That's why I'm here tonight. But I
Okay.
never understood that picture.
Great question. So the stick charts you're referring to are these quite beautiful charts of bamboo, split bamboo that are tied together with cowrie shells on them to mark the islands. Those are particular to the Marshall Islands, where the navigators use the refraction and reflection of swells as they bend around the islands to navigate. So, and each chart is made basically as a mnemonic by that navigator, who uses it to remember, the swell patterns in his voyaging range. So those tools do not obtain in the Central Carolines.
So I can leave now.
No. Yes, sir.
So are you saying that they're partially navigated by current, water current?
In the Marshalls, well, to the extent that currents influence the reflection or refraction pattern around the islands, then yes. But that,
What islands were based on?
well, if you're outside of land, then, and this was not an area of my study, so I read about it, in my preliminary research, but I didn't study it in the field, so I can't give you, a in-depth, in-person analysis of it. But the reflection and refraction patterns change as you are in different areas of the archipelago, depending on where the islands are, what the islands are doing to influence the swells.
I could. When,
You have a follow-up question?
yeah, because I get that when you're inshore and you can kind of, but as you get farther and farther away. And maybe or maybe not the turtles appear or the birds appear, how do you kind of like maintain where you're going?
In the Micronesian system or the Marshallese system?
Well, just anytime you're trying to go some long distance, like you went 60 miles, we're pretty far out there. And if you miss, it's a mile, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
You're gonna miss.
Well, traditionally you maintain direction using the stars at night. And the voyage to Peak that time we did without now they've adopted a traditional compass. And it's an interesting story because the Germans introduced the compass early in the German administration. And the Micronesians looked at the 32 compass points around, a traditional compass, that was marked in points and not degrees, and said, oh, this is a machine to mark the stars. And they noticed, slight variation between the magnetic bearing and the star bearing, which they account for. So, the power and convenience of the magnetic compass continues to this day. So, the knowledge of using the waves, the swells, to keep your course at night, on a dark night or during the day, is they're out of practice. But at night you use a star or one of the stars that follow on the same path. I mean, we did the Saipan voyage using stars, waves, and birds, no compass. And at any time, I would ask Piailug. I mean, this is a 4-day voyage, 5-day voyage. A really tough voyage because the trades are really blowing, really difficult. And he would name the star that he was following. It could be over the outrigger platform, it could be over the bow, it could be over the stern, could be over the lee platform. And some of the stars I couldn't even identify because they weren't even on the star charts at the time. So the skill level to do this is incredibly high. And you think, well, how do they do it? And a lot of it's athletic knowledge. I mean, you have to sort of be, on the basketball court practicing layups again and again and again and again to get good at it. And so that's how it happens. But yes, if you're off by 400 yards, you're off. Now there is a kind of a zone. Each voyage is divided into stages or epoch. And the first epoch is the epoch of sighting. You can see the island, and it's got different subdivided into various units depending on whether you can see the gnat bushes in front of the canoe house, and can you see people walking on the beach, and and so on. So it's subdivided into smaller units until the island is just one little nub on the horizon. And then you have the epoch of birds, which extends from the island about 18 miles out. And naughties and terns in particular fly out in the morning, straight from the island, they fish for the day, and then at dusk, they fly back. So it's common when you're making a final approach to lie to and wait for the birds to fly back to the island to confirm, that the island is where you think it is. Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. There was a question over here. Yes, sir.
Just I'm not sure how this question, but do you find that if you go out and it's a clear night, you find yourself looking at the stars and bringing it back to the time when you were on the islands, and also do you find yourself trying to navigate using what you learned in those days?
Well, it's a two-part question, so I'll answer part one first. Yeah, I go out at night and I look at all the stars, and I immediately think of how much I've forgotten, like all of us. Because I used to just be able to say, yeah, this one, and this one follows the same path, and so on. And you get out of practice. Reading the water is really the transferable skill. And I started surfing when I was 10, so I got used to reading the water as a kid, which served me in good stead on Satawal, because that's something you don't forget. But transferring that navigation system to Maine, where we live now, or Salem, Marblehead, it's not really doesn't really transfer.
So how does the waves work? They always come in the same direction?
No, I mean, you guys have spent enough time in the trades to know that they don't. So you check, but in the trade wind zone, there's consistent swell from the northeast to the northeast to the southeast or whatever. So you check, once that swell system gets set up, it's pretty consistent. But you have to check it in the morning early morning against the stars, and at dusk against the stars. So, that's really important. The other thing that they use is called they steer by, it's called bogobok. It's the knots between two swell systems. Just like two boat wakes coming together forms a knot. So they'll steer by the swell itself or by the knot. Or knots. There could be 3 or 4 of them. And analyzing that, I mean, it's never as simple, as clean swell is flowing across the ocean. So being able to read the water and break down all the different elements of what you're seeing, that takes a lot of sea time and a lot of practice. Now, traditionally, at night, when you couldn't see the stars and couldn't see the swells, they used a system or a technique called meafe, which is literally to feel. And it's feeling the pitch and roll of the boat in the swells. And if you think the other stuff was hard, that's really hard. And that is kind of the apex of the navigator's skill. So over time, I and anybody who studied this has come to realize this is one of the great achievements of the human mind and spirit. I mean, Ben Finney, who was a known surfer and paddler and was one of the academics behind the Hokulea experiment, because it was an academic experiment. So this is one of the great achievements of the human mind and spirit. There's no question about it. And it's lost. He actually offered me a PhD for the Last Navigator. I said, great. When do I pick it up? Not so fast. You have to do all the coursework. But we remained friends, until he died. But it is an extraordinary accomplishment.
Oh, there's someone on Zoom wants to know, is the documentary still available?
Yes, it's not available. We have tried to clear the rights.
Okay.
And this was back in the days when, you could borrow film from National Geographic, you could borrow film from somebody else. None of us ever got it, got sign-offs, releases for location or appearance releases, all that stuff that you have to do now. But I can give you a secret link and you can watch it. So
okay.
you can put it up on the
I could share it with the people who registered for the event. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just have to dig it out. It's up on a system called Frame.io, which the filmmakers use to review film between them.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
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 It's cool. Really cool. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that from an elder you learned conflict management, right?
Eton was conflict management. Yeah.
Any tips?
Oh yeah, no kidding. Yeah. So I asked Puitok. There's one Eton. So they didn't want me to translate the Eton in the book. I mean, they wanted me to translate it, but not put the original because it's still secret. But there's one which I called floating leaf. It's called floating leaf swept out, floating leaf swept back, the leaf of the tong tree, which is the leaf of our love, our communal love, that stands before the canoe house. His ears are full of talk. His ears are full of talk. So this is the one of the bushes in front of the canoe house is the tong tree, and in the fall, I guess, it turns the color of Ram, the color of turmeric, which is the color of wisdom. And it is floated away from the island, and Etong is bringing that leaf of wisdom back to the island in front of the canoe house so that the chiefs will recognize the conflict on the island and resolve the conflict. I said to Puitok, so what if a chief doesn't do anything about the conflict? And he said, well, then he's not rapey or wise, and therefore he's unqualified to be a chief, right? And I said, well, what if he ignores what if he ignores it and has determined in and of himself that he's still the chief and he doesn't have to follow the precepts of Eton? He said, well, then he would be considered crazy. And nobody, can you imagine? Where do I send the letter?
Yeah.
Maybe I could tweet it. I mean, yeah.
Steve, the Norwegian adventure of Kon-Tiki, were they utilizing the same navigational technique?
That's a good question. Was Kon-Tiki utilizing the same navigational methods? No. That was Thor Heyerdahl, who inspired all of us, by the way. I mean, it was a great adventure. He ended up in Tatuhiba, so it inflamed my youthful imagination about the whole Pacific. Plus, growing up in California, the doorstep of the Pacific was, also added gasoline to the fire. But they drifted. So his thesis was that the Polynesia was populated by drift voyages, just plain old drift voyages from South America, and that's why he went and made this papyrus raft and floated out there and eventually struck upon the Marquesas. So no, it was scientifically incorrect, but a great adventure story.
Oh, I have a 3-part question from someone on Zoom. So first is ignoring how much you've forgotten, how many navigators are there in the world at your skill level?
My skill level? Well, I can't claim any great skill level.
Okay.
Although I was ready to sail out on my own. Westerners, there's guys in Hawaii who kind of developed their own techniques. Mau Piailug went to Hawaii and taught the Hawaiians in the Polynesian Voyaging Society, and they kind of adapted systems that enabled them to sail the Hokulea. They've made a bunch of voyages now, including one around the world. So there are a number of skilled navigators there. Elsewhere in Micronesia, well, Rafabi tells me that there are still some younger guys who have learned, like Adagamai, the big fat guy, who was he was a charming guy. He looked scary, but he was gentle as a bear. And Metawada, who was feeding the movie, he still is navigating and teaching. So it's still there. How much, how active it is, I don't know, because I haven't been down there for a while. And they would never admit that it's not active, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's the big threat is that, these big Japanese skiffs, they call them pongas, these big stout skiffs that are really, good boats with a big, like 40 or 60 horsepower, 2-stroke Yamaha Enduro hand crank. They're using those to go off to Pagela and Peak now. And, so, because you can do it with 2 guys, 3 guys, and you don't need a whole crew of 12. So, it's just inevitable that it's going to get eroded. And that's what Piailug saw. And that was crushing to Piailug. He was bitter and angry about it. And I now understand how crushing it was to him.
Has the population of the island shrunk since you were there?
I don't know. I keep forgetting to ask Rafa because I'll ask him on Sunday, but there's still a lot of people there. There's a lot more porosity as people flow on and off of the island. There's a big kind of Satawalese encampment on Yap, on the big island of Hawaii, and to an extent on Guam, but there's a lot of expats that are diaspora, because as things shift to a cash economy, they go to find jobs. And then they go back, they go to Yap, and then their relatives come in. And so that's kind of, there's a lot more flow than there ever was before. Yes, sir.
Um. So where a star gets rises from the horizon, it sets from the horizon, that's gonna change daily a little bit, right?
Changes time, but not azimuth. Rising and setting azimuth change, it doesn't change. Changes slightly by latitude, but not a lot. But so in the voyaging range, there's virtually no change. So the stars rise 4 minutes earlier every night. So therefore the skies, the heavens change. But they'll use one of a number of substitute stars that travel the same path.
And is air pollution affecting this navigation?
Not really. Air pollution doesn't really have an effect on it down there because you're way, way out in the middle of the Pacific. Environmentally, the big concern is more frequent typhoons, more violent typhoons, more frequent big king tides on accompanying typhoons that are threatening the saltwater lands.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes,